The air in Alabama that summer was thick enough to choke a man. It carried the perfume of magnolia blossoms, sweet, heavy, intoxicating, and something else that few dared to name, something like sorrow. The petals fell slow as snow over the red soil, covering the earth where screams once sank and whispers still wandered. From the distance, the grand Winthrop plantation looked like paradise itself, but every breeze that stirred those white flowers carried the scent of what paradise had to hide. They said that at midnight, when the magnolia trees leaned toward the moon, you could hear humming from the old well behind the slave quarters, a woman's voice, soft as lullaby, trembling through the dark. Some said it was the ghost of Mary Lou, the housemaid who vanished one August night without a trace. Others said it was just the wind. But in Alabama 1850, the wind always had a way of remembering things that people wished to forget. But before we continue this disturbing story, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves hidden stories. It helps bring more of these untold truths to light. By dawn, the fields came alive. The overseer's horn split through the morning fog, calling the enslaved men and women to the cotton rows. The sound echoed across the riverbanks, stirring even the crows from their roosts. On the high veranda, Miss Eleanor Winthrop, barely 20, watched with distant eyes as the workers gathered, their backs already glistening in the sun. She held a lace fan before her face, but it couldn't hide the unease tightening her throat. Her father, Colonel Abram Winthrop, was a man molded from iron and scripture. A veteran of wars, a master of men. To outsiders, he was Alabama's noblest gentleman. To those who worked his land, he was the reason prayers were whispered under breath instead of spoken aloud. The colonel believed the plantation ran best when silence was the loudest sound. Eleanor had learned that silence early. It was stitched into her dresses, taught in her Sunday hymns, fed to her with every polite smile she gave to visiting ministers. But lately the silence around her home had begun to hum. At night she woke to the faint singing from the fields, a melody that didn't belong to the living. Down below, among the workers, Samuel stood out. Tall, quiet, his skin catching the light like polished wood. He had the eyes of someone who'd seen too much too soon. Rumor said he came from Georgia, sold after defending a woman from his previous master. But Eleanor had never asked. She didn't have to. Every glance they exchanged felt like a question that both were too afraid to voice. That morning, as she descended the veranda steps, their eyes met. For a second, the world stilled. The sound of cicadas, the buzz of flies, even the overseer's bark, all dimmed beneath the low hum of the magnolia trees. Then reality returned. Eleanor turned away, pretending she hadn't looked. Samuel bowed slightly, his hands tightening around the hoe handle, and the day went on as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. That night, Eleanor found herself standing by her window long after midnight. Outside, the moon lay pale over the fields. The magnolias swayed, and there it was again, that voice, soft, sad, singing words she couldn't quite make out. She slipped into her robe, lit a small lantern, and stepped into the hallway. The house slept. Her father's heavy footsteps echoed distantly from his chamber. Her mother's breathing wheezed behind a half-closed door. But the sound drew her, down the stairs, through the parlor lined with portraits of men who'd built their fortunes on other people's misery, and out to the back porch where the night was alive with heat and the song of crickets. The melody came from the direction of the old well. She followed, her bare feet brushing the dewy grass. The closer she came, the colder the air felt, as though the warmth itself was being drawn away. When she reached the well, the singing stopped. Only the creak of a rope swaying gently over the wooden beam remained. Eleanor held up her lantern and froze. There, half buried among the weeds, was a small lace handkerchief, stained brown with something long dried. Her initials were stitched in the corner. She hadn't seen it in weeks, not since the day Mary Lou had helped her dress for church. Her breath caught. She looked down into the well's dark mouth. The light from her lantern vanished in its depth. And then she heard it again. The faintest hum, like someone breathing beneath the water. She stumbled back, dropping the handkerchief, the lantern flickering out. Darkness swallowed her whole. And somewhere in that silence, she thought she heard a whisper. A single word, run. By morning, Eleanor told herself it had been a dream. Her father was already at the breakfast table, the day's newspaper open beside his plate. a cigar smoldering in his hand. "Your color's off, girl," he said without looking up. "You walk in your sleep again?" She hesitated. "No, Father." "Good. We've got the Burrows family coming for supper tonight. Best behave like a lady and not some moon-touched child." She nodded, her mind racing. That night's dinner was a performance of wealth. Silver cutlery, roast quail, polished words. But Eleanor barely tasted a thing. Every clang of glass, every polite laugh seemed to echo that whisper from the well. Run. When the guests finally left, she slipped outside again, drawn to the trees. But she wasn't alone. From the shadows near the stables, Samuel stepped forward, his expression tight. "Miss Eleanor," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be out here." Her heart jumped. "Did you hear it last night?" He looked at her strangely. "Hear what?" "The singing. From the well." Samuel's gaze hardened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You stay away from that place. Ain't nothing there but ghosts of what this house done." Before she could answer, a voice thundered from behind them. "Samuel!" The overseer, lantern in hand, stormed out of the dark. "What the hell you doing talking to the mistress at this hour?" Eleanor froze. "It's fine, Mr. Harlan." But Harlan wasn't listening. He struck Samuel hard across the mouth, knocking him to the ground. The lantern swung wildly, spilling light across the yard. "Get up, boy!" Eleanor screamed. "Stop it!" The noise brought Colonel Winthrop to the porch. His shadow loomed large, his voice calm but cold. "What's the commotion?" "Caught him whispering to your daughter, sir," Harlan spat. Middle of the night. The colonel's gaze moved from Eleanor to Samuel, and something inside his face turned to stone. "Take him to the shed," he said. "We'll deal with him come morning." Samuel didn't resist. He stood, blood at the corner of his mouth, and met Eleanor's eyes once more before the darkness took him. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The house was too still, the air too heavy. She kept seeing Samuel's face, calm, resigned, like a man who had already known too many mornings like the one to come. At dawn, the whip cracked. From her window, she could see it, Harlan in the yard, arm raised, Samuel tied to the post. She pressed her hand to her mouth as the sound tore through the air. The other workers watched in silence, their faces carved from grief. When it was over, Samuel collapsed to his knees. Harlan spat in the dirt and walked away. Eleanor ran, down the stairs, across the porch, through the field, barefoot, wild, tears blinding her. She reached Samuel as he struggled to breathe. "Please," she whispered. "Please get up. I'll help you." He looked at her with a faint, weary smile. "You can't help me, Miss Eleanor. Not in this world." And then, faintly from somewhere near the well, the singing began again. This time, Eleanor heard the words. "The Lord's gonna trouble the water." Samuel's eyes widened. "Mary Lou," he whispered. Before Eleanor could speak, the ground beneath them trembled, just slightly, like something shifting deep under the soil. The magnolia petals fell heavier, the air thick with their perfume. And in that moment, Eleanor realized something dreadful. The song wasn't coming from the well anymore. It was coming from the house. By sunset, the plantation was whispering. The servants murmured of strange noises in the hall, doors slamming on their own, mirrors clouding with breath when no one stood before them. The colonel scoffed, claiming it was hysteria. But when he entered his study that night, the smell of magnolia was so strong it made his eyes water. On his desk lay a folded handkerchief. White lace, Eleanor's initials. He frowned, picking it up. It was damp, like it had been washed in the well. Then, a voice behind him. "Father." He turned. Eleanor stood in the doorway, pale as moonlight. "We need to leave this place," she said. "Now. Don't be foolish, girl. This is our home." Her voice trembled. "It isn't ours. It never was." The colonel's jaw tightened. "You've been listening to the slaves again? Filling your head with ghost tales and nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," she whispered. "She's here." "Who?" Eleanor's eyes flicked to the corner of the room. "Mary Lou." The colonel laughed once, sharp and hollow. "That girl ran off years ago." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "No, Father. She didn't run. You buried her." For the first time in years, the colonel said nothing. The cigar slipped from his hand, burning a small black mark into the rug. Outside, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear, and through the open window came the faint, sweet scent of magnolia, mixed now with something darker, like rot, like revenge. The cigar smoldered out on the carpet, filling the room with a thin line of smoke that rose like a soul escaping. Colonel Abram Winthrop stood still, his eyes fixed on the lace handkerchief in his hand. Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. "Eleanor," he said at last, his voice low, controlled. "You've let the heat get to your head." But his daughter did not move. The storm brewing behind her eyes was something he'd never seen before. For 20 years, Eleanor had been the picture of Southern grace, obedient, delicate, silent. Now, she looked like a ghost herself, draped in white, her hair loose, her voice trembling, not from fear but from fury barely contained. "You lied to me," she whispered. The colonel's jaw flexed. "Mind your tongue, girl. You said Mary Lou ran away. You said the Lord took her into the world." He looked away. "That's what happens when you give a servant too much freedom. They forget their place." "Her place?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Her place was in this house, Father. She was my friend." Her father's palm came down on the desk with a sound like a gunshot. "Enough!" The sound echoed through the room, stirring the dust that clung to the portraits on the wall, generations of Winthrop men glaring down from gilded frames. The colonel turned his back to her, his hands trembling though he tried to hide it. "Go to bed," he muttered. "And you'll speak of this to no one." Eleanor took a step forward. "Tell me what you did to her." I said go to bed, but she didn't move. "Did you bury her under the magnolia trees, Father?" His shoulders tensed. The silence that followed was answer enough. Then the lamp on the desk flickered. Once, twice, and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The air felt charged, thick with the smell of burning oil and magnolia blossoms, stronger now than ever. Eleanor's fingers trembled around the lantern she still carried. When she lifted it, she saw her father standing rigid, his face pale. What in God's name?" he began, but the words died as the window burst open, slamming against the wall. A cold gust swept through, scattering papers. Rattling picture frames. Eleanor's lantern flame danced wildly, and then they heard it, the singing. Faint, distant, carried on the wind, weighed in the water. "Children." The colonel stumbled back, his breath catching. "No, no." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "She's here." By morning, the entire household buzzed with fear. The servants whispered of footsteps in the halls when no one walked, of a figure in white glimpsed near the well. Even the overseer Harlan avoided the fields near dawn, claiming he'd seen a shadow with eyes like burning coals. The colonel dismissed it all as hysteria, but he didn't sleep. Eleanor watched him from afar as he grew more erratic. He took to drinking early, his hands shaking as he poured. He spent hours locked in his study, muttering to himself, his Bible open but unread. Outside, the magnolia trees began to shed early that year, their petals falling like pale snow, carpeting the ground in white. The smell was overpowering. It clung to clothes, hair, skin, as if the earth itself was bleeding perfume. Samuel hadn't been seen since the punishment. Rumor said he'd been sent upriver to another plantation, but Eleanor didn't believe it. She knew her father's way of making problems disappear, and somewhere inside she feared Samuel had joined Mary Lou beneath the roots. 3 nights later, the housemaid Ruth came to Eleanor's door, her eyes wide with terror. "Miss Eleanor," she whispered, "you best come see this." Eleanor followed her through the corridor to the great hall. The candles had all gone out save one flickering near the staircase. There, at the bottom step, lay a trail of muddy footprints, bare, small, leading from the direction of the back porch toward the parlor. "They just appeared," Ruth said, clutching her apron. "I seen 'em form one by one like someone was walking, but ain't no body there." Eleanor crouched, touching one of the prints. The mud was fresh, still damp, and beneath it she could smell magnolia. She rose slowly. "Where's my father?" "In his study, miss." Eleanor walked down the hall, her heart pounding. The door to the study was ajar, a thin line of light spilling into the corridor. She pushed it open and froze. The colonel was on his knees before the fireplace, ashes smeared across his hands and face. He was holding something, a small wooden box, its lid open. Inside lay a silver locket tarnished with age. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. It won't stop, he whispered. I burned the clothes, the rope, the ledger. I buried the past, but it keeps coming back. What did you do, Father? The colonel stared into the flames. You think this house was built on honor, girl? You think these fields grew from honest soil? Every acre of Winthrop land is watered with blood. Her blood. He turned to her then, tears streaking through the ash on his face. I didn't mean to kill her. I swear it. I was trying to make her talk. The silver went missing, and I thought, God forgive me, I thought she took it. She begged, said she didn't, but I wouldn't hear it. When I struck her, she fell, hit her head on the stone. And the next thing I knew, she was gone. Eleanor's breath hitched. And you buried her? Under the oldest magnolia tree, he whispered. Where the roots run deep. I thought the earth would keep her secret. He looked up at his daughter, trembling. But the earth remembers. The trees remember. Eleanor took a step back, her mind spinning. The song, the whispers, the scent. It all made sense now. Then make it right, she said. I can't. You can try. The colonel's voice broke. How do you make peace with the dead? Eleanor looked toward the window. The magnolia trees swayed, their branches heavy with blossoms. You listen, she said softly. You stop hiding. That night, the colonel ordered a lantern and shovel brought to him. He told no one why, but Eleanor followed, barefoot and silent, as he walked out across the fields. The moon hung low, staining everything silver. The cicadas sang their ghostly chorus, and somewhere far off, thunder rumbled again, though the sky was clear. He stopped beneath the oldest magnolia. Its trunk was enormous, gnarled, the roots sprawling like veins. The scent of the flowers was suffocating. This is where, he said, right here. He began to dig, at first only dry earth, then darker soil, damp and rich, then something pale, cloth. The shovel hit wood. A faint, hollow sound. The colonel fell to his knees, clawing at the dirt with his bare hands until the lid of a small wooden box appeared. Not a coffin, too small. More like a chest. He hesitated, then pried it open. Inside lay bones. Small, fragile, a few strands of dark hair still clinging to them. And around the neck, a broken silver chain. Eleanor covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Oh, God. The colonel stared, shaking. I didn't mean to. A whisper cut him off. From the branches above came a voice low and mournful. Didn't mean to. He froze. Who's there? The magnolia leaves rustled. Didn't mean to. The voice echoed again, closer now. Eleanor clutched her lantern, backing away. Father, we have to go. Then the tree itself seemed to move. The blossoms quivered, shedding petals like rain. A cold wind tore through the air. The colonel turned, and there she was. Mary Lou. Her figure shimmered in the moonlight, her skin pale as ivory, her eyes deep and dark, filled with sorrow and fury both. Her dress floated like mist around her feet. You took everything from me, she said. The colonel staggered back. No, no, please. Eleanor dropped to her knees, sobbing. Mary Lou, please, he's sorry. Mary Lou's gaze softened as it fell on Eleanor. Child sorrow don't wash sin clean. Only truth does. She turned her eyes back to the colonel. And the truth's been buried too long. Her form began to glow, faint blue light spilling through the branches. The ground trembled. The magnolia roots coiled, twisting through the soil like snakes. One wrapped around the colonel's leg. He screamed, struggling to free himself, but the earth held tight. Mary Lou, Eleanor cried. Please stop. Mary Lou's eyes met hers again. The land must remember. The roots tightened. The colonel's scream cut through the night, echoing across the fields. Then, silence. When the light faded, the magnolia tree stood still once more. Only the scent of its blossoms remained. The ground where the colonel had stood was undisturbed. No sign of struggle, no grave, just the earth, newly fed. Eleanor fell to her knees, sobbing into the soil. What have you done? The voice came again, faint, like a breeze through leaves. What was always meant to be. By dawn, the plantation was quiet. Too quiet. The overseer found Eleanor sitting beneath the magnolia, her white gown streaked with dirt. When he asked where the master was, she only whispered, Gone. That day, she sent every servant home. Freed them one by one with papers her father had signed long ago but never delivered. Some wept, some prayed, some simply walked away and never looked back. That night, Eleanor packed her belongings and set fire to the house. The flames spread fast, devouring the halls, the portraits, the lies. The sky glowed red over Alabama, and the scent of Magnolia burned with the smoke. From the distance, some swore they saw a woman in white standing before the blaze, her hair loose, her eyes lifted to the stars. Others said there were two women, one pale, one dark, standing side by side until the fire swallowed them both. When the morning came, nothing remained but ash and the old magnolia tree, standing untouched amid the ruin, its blossoms white as bone, and those who passed by years later swore they could still smell it. The sweetness of magnolia, heavy with memory, whispering through the air. The fire burned for 3 days. Neighbors from miles around came with buckets and prayers, but it was too late. The great Winthrop house, once a monument to wealth and pride, collapsed into a glowing skeleton of embers. The smoke rolled low across the Alabama hills, carrying the smell of magnolia and charred oak all the way to the river. When the flames finally died, nothing was left but the blackened stone steps and the old magnolia tree, untouched. Its blossoms impossibly white against the ruin. People called it a miracle. Others called it a curse. Eleanor Winthrop was never found. Some swore they saw her wandering the fields that night, her dress trailing sparks, her hair shining like fire. Others said she vanished into the woods and never returned. But by morning, only footprints remained in the ash, small, barefoot prints leading toward the magnolia, and then stopping suddenly, as if she had stepped into thin air. And in the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen. Travelers passing near the ruins at night reported hearing voices, soft, distant like women singing through smoke. The old spiritual echoed through the air, sometimes so faint it was mistaken for wind, sometimes clear enough to send men running for their horses. Wade in the water. Children. Those who dared to come closer said the air around the magnolia tree shimmered with light faint and blue, like moonlit mist. No birds nested there. No grass grew at its roots. Yet the tree flourished, blooming out of season. Its petals always fresh, always fragrant. Locals began calling it the magnolia that wouldn't die. And the land, once the richest in the county, turned barren. The crops on neighboring farms wilted. Horses refused to cross the property line. At night, the new owners heard knocking beneath the floors, whispering in the walls, and a slow creak like wood twisting in pain. No one stayed long. By 1855, the land had been abandoned. The story of the Winthrop plantation faded into rumor, then into legend. A generation passed. The Civil War came and went, leaving Alabama scarred and silent. Freedmen built new lives in the ashes of the Old South, and those who had once been owned returned as landowners themselves. Yet the Winthrop grounds remained untouched, avoided by all. Children dared each other to run through it at dusk. Some came back pale and speechless. Others swore they heard a woman's voice calling their names from the well. In 1872, a traveling preacher named Reverend Elijah Cross arrived in Monroe County. He was a man of scripture and spectacle, tall, fiery-eyed, known for driving demons from men with the same fury he used to drive sinners to repentance. When he heard of the cursed plantation, he declared it the devil's garden and vowed to cleanse it. A crowd followed him to the ruins one Sunday evening. The magnolia tree loomed before them, its white blossoms glowing in the dusk. Reverend Cross planted his Bible on the ground and raised his hands to the sky. "Lord," he thundered, "purge this land of evil and deceit. Break the chains that bind the spirits of darkness." The air grew still. Even the crickets stopped. He began to pray louder, his voice echoing across the fields. And then something answered. A wind rose, twisting through the branches. The petals began to fall, not drifting softly this time, but spinning violently, slicing through the air like a storm of white fire. The crowd screamed as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Reverend Cross shouted scripture into the wind, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of singing. Wade in the water. It came from everywhere, above, below, inside their own heads. The preacher dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. His eyes rolled white, and a voice not his own escaped his mouth. Blood in the roots, and truth in the soil. Then he collapsed. When the crowd dared to approach, they found him breathing, but his hair had turned white as bone. He left town the next morning and never preached again. From that day on, no one tried to cleanse the Winthrop land. Time rolled forward like the slow churn of the river. The world changed. Railroads came, the South rebuilt, but the Magnolia tree stood, indifferent to years. In 1901, a family from Montgomery bought the land. They cleared the brush, planted new crops, and built a small house near where the old one had burned. For a time it seemed the curse had lifted, until their youngest daughter, Clara, began talking to someone no one else could see. "She says her name's Mary," the girl told her mother one night. "She hums songs when I can't sleep." Her mother smiled nervously. An imaginary friend, then? But when Clara's father went to fetch her from the field one afternoon, he found her standing beneath the magnolia, eyes closed, singing in a voice far too old for her small body. "Wade in the water." He rushed forward, shouting her name, but she didn't move. The wind began to blow, petals swirling around her like a crown. Then she opened her eyes. They were not her own. "Tell them," she said softly. "Tell them what was buried." And then she fainted. When Clara woke hours later, she didn't remember a thing. But her father swore he'd never heard such a voice before, or since. The next week, he moved his family away. The house stood empty for years until it too fell into ruin. By the 1920s, the Winthrop property had become the centerpiece of ghost tours and whispered folklore. Writers and journalists came chasing stories, but none stayed past sunset. One of them, a young reporter named Henry Lowell from Birmingham, kept a diary. His notes, found decades later, described what he saw during his last night at the plantation. The magnolia tree stands like a monument to something unholy. The air smells sweet but rotten, like flowers left too long in the sun. Near midnight, I heard a woman singing. I followed the sound to the well. There was light, faint blue. I thought it was the moon, until I saw her reflection in the water. She looked up at me, smiling. I ran. Henry Lowell vanished 2 days later. His car was found on the road leading out of Monroe County, the engine running, the driver's door wide open. The seat was covered in white magnolia petals. After that, the county sealed off the land. No one went near it again, but the world has a way of forgetting. By the 1960s, developers began eyeing the area once more. Alabama was changing, factories rising, new roads paving over the ghosts of the past. The Winthrop land, with its rich soil and wide fields, was worth money again. A company called Southland Estates purchased the property in 1967, planning to build suburban homes. Bulldozers arrived, carving roads through the wild grass. Workers cut down the smaller trees and shrubs. But when they reached the magnolia, their saws jammed. The bark dulled their blades. Their engines stalled. One worker swore the tree was humming. They tried to dig around the roots instead. That's when they found the bones. Small ones at first. Animal, they thought. Then human. Dozens of them. Men, women, even children. Some shackled together by rusted iron. The construction stopped immediately. Authorities came. Historians arrived. The site was declared a burial ground for enslaved people, hidden and forgotten for over a century. But the magnolia tree stood right at the center. Reporters swarmed the story. Headlines read, "Mass grave unearthed at Old Winthrop Plantation. Roots of the South's darkest secret." And once again, the air in Alabama carried the scent of magnolia, sweet, heavy, impossible to ignore. One journalist covering the dig, Lydia Harrow, wrote an article that would later make her famous. But in her private notebook, she penned something that never made print. "The locals still won't come near after sundown. They say the singing never stopped. I thought it superstition until I stayed past dark. I heard it myself. It was a hymn. And in the pause between verses, I heard two voices. One was pleading. The other was forgiving." That night, Lydia dreamed of a woman standing beneath the magnolia tree, holding hands with a pale young girl. Their faces were calm, serene, their hair lifted gently by a wind that wasn't there. When she woke, her tent was filled with magnolia petals. The site was eventually turned into a memorial. The magnolia tree, older than any living person, was declared protected by the state. A plaque was placed at its base, in memory of the forgotten souls who labored, loved, and lost beneath the magnolias. May their spirits find peace. Visitors still come, some to pray, some to listen. Most leave flowers. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone swears they hear a hum in the breeze, a faint hymn beneath the rustle of the leaves. They say if you stand there long enough, you'll catch the scent. Sweet at first, then bitter. And if you whisper Mary Lou into the wind, the air will change. The petals will stir. And somewhere deep beneath the roots, a voice will answer, I remember. 170 years after the fire, the story of the Winthrop Plantation has become folklore, history, and warning all at once. The magnolia tree still blooms every year, defying storms, droughts, and time itself. Scientists say its age is impossible, that a tree shouldn't live this long. But the locals have another explanation. They say a promise keeps it alive. A promise made between two women, one bound by blood, the other by love. Both silenced by men who thought their sins could stay buried. But the earth remembers, the air remembers, and the magnolias still bloom. The year was 2023. The Winthrop grounds had long since become a footnote in local history, the kind of place mentioned in documentaries with soft violin music and black and white photographs. The memorial still stood, overgrown with ivy, its brass plaque tarnished by decades of rain. No one lived within 2 miles of the site anymore, except for one woman. Her name was Dr. Naomi Harrow, a historical anthropologist from Atlanta, and the granddaughter of journalist Lydia Harrow, the woman who had once heard the singing at the excavation in 1967. Naomi wasn't a believer in curses. She believed in records, evidence, and bones that told the truth better than people did. But after her grandmother's death, Naomi had inherited a box of old notes, photographs, and one burned journal page that changed everything. The page smelled faintly of smoke and pressed flowers. The handwriting was Lydia's. She said they are still here. The roots drink more than rain. Below the line, someone, not Lydia, had added a name in shaky ink, Mary Lou Winthrop. Naomi had never heard of her. Not in archives, not in registries. Yet the name stirred something in the pull, quiet but insistent, like the hum of that old hymn she half remembered from childhood. So she drove south. The road to Monroe County was long and silent, framed by cypress and hanging moss. The closer she got, the thicker the air became, heavy with humidity and the faint scent of something floral. When she reached the Plantation Memorial, the sun was dipping behind the hills. The magnolia tree stood at the center of the clearing, exactly as her grandmother had described, massive, ancient, impossibly alive. The bark looked smooth, almost wet, and the blossoms glowed faintly in the low light, as if holding on to the last fire of sunset. Naomi parked her jeep by the roadside and stepped out. Her boots sank into soft earth. No birds sang, only the whisper of leaves. She began recording notes into her phone. Site intact. Minimal vandalism. Tree remains stable. Soil sample to be taken near base. Her voice sounded too loud in the silence. She knelt and began digging a small core sample near the roots. The soil was rich, dark, until her trowel struck something hard. Bone. Naomi froze. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The piece was small, maybe from an animal. But as she brushed the dirt away, she saw the distinct curve of a human rib. The site had been declared fully excavated decades ago. So why were there still remains here? She looked up at the magnolia tree. The wind had died completely, yet one petal fell from above, landing gently on her hand. It was white, pure and perfect. But when she turned it over, the underside was stained crimson. Naomi stayed the night at a small motel in town. The desk clerk, a thin old man with cloudy eyes, looked up when she signed the register. "You ain't staying near the Winthrop place, are you?" "I'm working," she replied. He chuckled softly. "That's what they all say." Naomi forced a polite smile. "You believe in the stories?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Belief ain't got nothing to do with it, miss. That tree don't forget faces. It remembers bloodlines. If you're kin to the woman that stirred it last time—" He stopped himself. "Just don't stay after dark." Naomi's pen stilled. "What woman?" He squinted at her. "You're her spittin' image. Lydia Harrow, wasn't it?" Naomi felt her throat tighten. She was my grandmother. The man's expression darkened. Then you best leave that tree alone. It already knows you're here. But Naomi didn't leave. The next morning, she returned to the site with her equipment, scanners, cameras, and a ground-penetrating radar unit. She was determined to finish what her grandmother had started, to uncover the truth, not the superstition. As the sun climbed higher, she began scanning beneath the tree. The machine chirped, drawing patterns on the display. Layers of roots, stone, and soil appeared, until suddenly beneath them, a faint outline, a rectangular void, a coffin, and it wasn't empty. Naomi's hands trembled as she adjusted the frequency. The outline was human-sized, buried directly beneath the Magnolia's heart. But according to every historical record, all remains had been relocated to the memorial cemetery. This grave wasn't supposed to exist. She whispered to herself, "Who are you?" Then the machine shut off. The screen flickered, then went dark. A cold wind swept through the clearing. The Magnolia's petals began to fall, dozens, hundreds, swirling like snow. And then, she heard it, a hum, soft, low. At first she thought it was the wind moving through the branches. But no, it was a voice, female, ancient. Wait, in the water. Naomi's breath hitched. She turned in slow circles, recording everything. Audio anomaly detected. Repeating frequency. The voice grew louder, closer, wrapping around her. She could feel it vibrate in her chest. And then another sound joined. A child's voice, fragile, echoing the same hymn. Naomi dropped the recorder. She stumbled backward, her eyes fixed on the base of the Magnolia. The soil beneath it seemed to move, shifting like something breathing under the roots. The hymn stopped, and in its place came a whisper. "Help her." Naomi froze. "Who?" No answer. Just the faint rustle of petals falling again. That night, she went back through her grandmother's notes. In one entry, dated June 1967, Lydia had written, "The singing grows louder near the roots. They say one woman was different, white, but kind. She hid their children when the masters came. They took her to the cellar and made the others watch. Her name was Mary Lou Winthrop. The soil remembers." Naomi's heart raced. Mary Lou, the same name written on the burned page. She connected the pieces, the missing mistress, the vanished body, the magnolia that bloomed from ash. The grave beneath it wasn't random. It was hers. The fire hadn't consumed Mary Lou. It had buried her. And now, a century later, something beneath the earth was still waiting for her story to be told. The next morning, Naomi returned with a small team of university volunteers, students who believed they were part of a standard archaeological study. They set up their tents and equipment around the site, careful not to damage the Magnolia's roots. Naomi gave clear instructions. No digging deeper than 1 meter. Photograph everything. Label all findings. By noon, the first signs of disturbance appeared in the soil. Old brick, glass fragments, a rusted hinge. Evidence of the original plantation house's foundation. Then one student called out, "Dr. Harrow, you should see this." She hurried over. The student held up a metal chain, half buried, covered in reddish dirt. It wasn't iron, it was gold. The links were delicate, etched with tiny engravings, initials barely visible. M.W. Naomi's chest tightened. "Mary Lou Winthrop." The student frowned. "You think it's hers?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think we're standing right above her." That night, the wind returned, strong, wild, carrying the smell of rain and flowers. The tents flapped violently. The magnolia tree swayed but didn't break, its blossoms glowing faintly in flashes of lightning. Naomi sat in her tent, listening to the storm. She played back her recorder from the previous day. The faint hum was still there, but now there was something else. Between the words, "Help her," a whisper, one she hadn't heard before. The cellar. Naomi's pulse quickened. She remembered the burned foundation stones near the southern end of the site. If the old plantation had a basement or hidden room, it would have been beneath that area, exactly where the magnolia's roots now stretched. She grabbed her flashlight and ran into the rain. The ground was slick, the air thick with electricity. She knelt by the foundation, pushing aside the mud and grass. Her light caught the edge of something rectangular, a door made of warped wood and rusted metal rings. She hesitated, heart hammering. The whisper came again, faint but clear this time. Below. She pulled the handle. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow stone stairway descending into darkness. The air that came out was cold, older than the rain, older than the tree itself. Naomi descended slowly, each step echoing. The walls were damp, carved crudely from earth and limestone. At the bottom, her light fell on a row of wooden beams and a collapsed ceiling. And beneath it, bones, hundreds of them, some still bound by rusted chains. Naomi covered her mouth. Oh my God! Among them lay a smaller skeleton, separate, almost untouched by the rot of time. Around its neck hung a golden chain identical to the one she'd found earlier. The initials shone faintly through the dirt. WW. The magnolia's roots curled around the bones like protective arms. And as Naomi stared, she realized what the tree had been feeding on for all these years. It wasn't just soil. It was memory. And it was alive. Above her, thunder rolled across the Alabama hills. The storm howled through the broken cellar. Naomi's flashlight flickered. For a moment the beam shifted, and she saw two shapes in the darkness. A woman in a torn white dress. A child beside her, holding her hand, both smiling. The woman spoke softly, voice echoing like wind through magnolia petals. Tell them what they did. Then they vanished. Naomi stumbled back up the stairs, gasping for air, rain drenching her face. The magnolia tree loomed above, blossoms glowing in the lightning. And for the first time, she understood that it wasn't cursed. It was guarding something. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Mist coiled over the hills like breath on glass, and the magnolia tree shimmered beneath it, each petal heavy with dew. Naomi Harrow sat at the base of the roots, soaked, shaking, her recorder clutched tight in her hand. The cellar door behind her gaped open, a wound in the earth. Below it, bones waited. Voices waited. Truth waited. She had spent the night staring into that darkness, hearing the whispers rise and fall like tidewater. They weren't screams anymore, just soft rhythmic murmurs. A lullaby, a hymn that had crossed centuries. Swing low, sweet chariot. The melody floated faint and hollow, echoing through the roots. Naomi whispered, I hear you. Then she switched on the recorder and began to speak, her voice trembling but steady. This is Dr. Naomi Harrow. Day 3 at the Winthrop excavation site. I've located a concealed chamber beneath the magnolia tree, containing multiple human remains, men, women, and children, most showing signs of restraint and burn trauma. I believe this may be the final resting place of enslaved individuals who perished during the Winthrop Fire of 1850, and of Mary Lou Winthrop herself. She looked toward the sunrise. It painted the mist gold, like the beginning of something holy. This story was buried, but the earth remembers, and I will tell it. 2 days later, Naomi's footage began circulating online, grainy clips from her camera, stills of the magnolia tree glowing in lightning, and audio of the humming voice that had chilled every listener to silence. The university disavowed her almost immediately. They said her evidence was inconclusive. They said she'd trespassed, but the video didn't die. It spread. Within weeks, journalists, activists, and descendants of enslaved families began arriving at Winthrop Hill. They stood beneath the magnolia's shadow, whispering prayers, leaving candles, singing the same hymn Naomi had recorded. And then something began to change. The magnolia bloomed again, but this time in winter. The blossoms opened wide, their white petals streaked with crimson veins. Local children said the scent filled the air for miles, heavy, sweet, impossible to ignore. People who visited swore they heard faint voices in the wind, humming old songs that no one alive could remember. The county tried to fence it off. They said it was for safety. But every morning, the gates were found open as if the locks had melted away. Naomi returned 6 months later. The memorial had transformed. Someone had placed new plaques beside the old ones, etched not by the government, but by hand. The names carved into them weren't recorded anywhere else. Abigail, Ruth, Samuel, Josiah, and at the bottom of one, Mary Lou Winthrop, the one who sang. Naomi traced the letters with her fingers. Her eyes filled. Behind her, a news crew prepared to film a segment for a documentary called The Scent of Magnolia. She was supposed to speak on camera to explain the cultural and archaeological significance of what she'd found. But when the interviewer approached, Naomi just looked at the tree and said quietly, "It wasn't an archaeological find. It was an apology." The man blinked. "An apology?" She nodded. The land was trying to say sorry, and now it finally can. That night, Naomi stayed alone by the Magnolia. She lit a small lantern and set it beside the roots. The flame flickered, painting the bark gold. The air smelled like sweetness and ash. She took out her grandmother's old journal, the one burned at the edges, and opened to the last page, the line Lydia Harrow had written decades ago. She said they are still here. The roots drink more than rain. Naomi smiled faintly. "Not anymore," she whispered. "They're free." The wind stirred. The petals shivered. And then she heard it again. A voice, soft, gentle, carrying the warmth of forgiveness. "Thank you." Naomi closed her eyes. When she opened them, the magnolia was glowing faintly in the moonlight. At its base, the roots had begun to split the soil open, not in violence, but in offering. The ground revealed bones, glinting faintly beneath the light, before the roots began to curl back, laying them bare for the world to see. It was as if the tree was surrendering its secret. Naomi recorded everything. But she didn't post it this time. She sent the footage to a museum. She sent the story to her grandmother's grave. And then, as dawn came, she walked away, leaving the magnolia to keep singing for those who would listen. Months later, a marble monument was built on the site, not by the state, but by the people. It bore no slogans, no politics, just one inscription carved deep into stone. "Here lie the voices that refuse to die. May their song outlive the silence." Every year since, when the Alabama spring arrives, the magnolia tree blooms early. The petals fall across the monument, soft as snow, carrying that same haunting perfume through the air. Locals say if you stand beneath it long enough, you can still hear the hymn, low, distant, like the breath of history itself. Wait in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. And as the scent drifts across the fields, people stop and listen, because for one fleeting moment, the line between past and present disappears. The dead are not gone. They are simply remembered, and in that memory, they bloom again. If you love the darkness, stay with us. Subscribe before the lights go out.